Rumor has it the Pittsburgh Steelers might be interested in Chase Young, but will it actually happen? We'll talk about that on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast, joined by Jeff Hartman of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Monday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. More on that later. We've got Jeff Hartman back on the show. He's a regular. We've had him back on the show before. He runs BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, and Jeff came out here spitting hot fire with a sources story from BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Now, for those who don't know, I came from BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. That's where I got started many years ago. I used to be writing with Jeff. We used to do late night podcasts, all this stuff before podcasts were like blown up the way they are today. But Jeff and I used to do this all the time. So it's awesome to see Jeff out here with the sources. But Jeff, your story, which you can still read at BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, source: Steelers are in on Chase Young, but not on Dalvin Cook. Your source indicates in the story that the Steelers do have a strong interest in acquiring Chase Young, the edge rusher and former first-round pick of the Washington Commanders. And that is an interesting thing to look at here because what Chase Young could be for the Steelers, I think that I want to get your thoughts on. One, how strong do you think that of a possibility this is even happening with this being your source? And two, where would be his fit right now after the addition of Markus Golden and you have Watt and Highsmith?
Yeah, that's the one thing that a lot of people were asking, as a follow up to the story, and they're like, okay, well, what does this mean for Alex Highsmith? Well, I specifically asked about that, and they said that doesn't mean that a deal won't get done with Alex Highsmith.
Right.
And the one common thread amongst the conversation that I had was this is going to take some wizardry if they pull it off. And that's if they pull it off. And that is Omar Khan's going to have to really get creative if they are going to acquire a player like Chase Young. And you have to think, no one really knows what would that asking price even be. Yes, top 5 overall pick. Yes, he's dynamic, but he's also been injury plagued. And I think he's only played one full season in his career since being drafted by the Washington franchise. It just doesn't, you don't know. No one knows what that asking price would be in terms of from Washington's perspective. How does Washington view him? All I know is that the Steelers are interested. They want playmakers. And according to the source, they have 2 that they feel are in their prime. You know who those are. That's TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick. Yeah. That doesn't mean that Patrick Peterson's not a playmaker. That doesn't mean Cam Hayward's not a playmaker. Those guys are at the end of their career, though.
Right.
They want more playmakers. They want that proven edge rusher, another player that can get after the quarterback. Chase Young would seem to fit that mold if he's healthy. I know reports out of Washington that he's looked very, very good early on in OTAs. It's football in shorts. I get it. But still, this is just one of those things where there's interest. Does it mean that something's going to happen? No, not necessarily, but there is interest.
And that's the thing is that and here's the thing. We also seen Mike Tomlin express his appreciation of Chase Young when they played Washington years ago. And he was like, man, I don't ever want to be bad enough to get someone like you telling him how high the Commanders had to go up and draft him being an impressed player. But that's the thing. The Steelers definitely appreciate him. And I bet you that somewhere in the Steelers organization, they're like, man, if we could pull that off, that would be amazing. But I've talked to David Harrison, who runs Locked On Commanders. He's like, listen, like it would take a perfect scenario for this to happen, for them to be even one. He's like, from what he understands, the Commanders aren't even necessarily that interested in trading for trading him away. And so I think that here's the thing. Again, there's no delegitimizing what you're saying because the Steelers I mean, they've, like I said, they've expressed it before openly. Like, they like Chase Young. It's one of those picks like Minkah Fitzpatrick. They knew that Minkah Fitzpatrick was never going to be drafted by the Steelers because he wouldn't fall that far. But they did their preliminary interviews with him during the draft process because you never know. I bet they did the same thing with Chase Young, and in hopes of, like they did with like hundreds of players over the years, and saying like, hey, if he does come back around and he comes available.
Well, let me ask you this. If the Washington organization values Chase Young so much, why would they not pick up his 5th-year option?
That's a great question. And it's the same question that's being asked by Isaiah Simmons with the Cardinals. We'll get to that more in the second segment. Right. But I agree that is a big question here. But the question that I think the Steelers also have to ask themselves is, what price is it going to take to get Chase Young? And then what do you do when you get Chase Young? Because you bring him in, he's going to be entering the last year of his contract, and you're going to have, I mean, it's going to be awesome for this year. You're going to have TJ, you're going to have Highsmith, you're going to have Golden, you're going to have Chase Young. You will not have any questions about the depth of your edge rushing. TJ Watt could go down for a week or two, and you wouldn't have the best defensive player in the NFL, but you would have actual replacements ready to go who are talented, who could start for a lot of different teams out there. But moving forward, the question would be then, what does this fit mean for you long term? What does it do for Alex Highsmith? What does it do for the money that they want to spend? How much would it take to even keep a Chase Young beyond that? And like we said, Alex Highsmith, who has told us in the locker room during OTAs that things look good. Both sides are really willing to make a deal right now as far as his extension to stay with the Steelers. It makes me wonder. This would be a perfect scenario if Washington would give him up for like a 5th or a 6th round pick, but if the Steelers could use a 4th round pick even to go get another type of player that might fit a position that I think that is more of a need right now, especially after the Markus Golden signing, is Chase Young that good that you would make a trade that might make it harder to do something else like that? Where do you value a Chase Young addition to how the Steelers depth chart is now, Jeff?
Well, let me answer your question with a question. I hate it when my guests do this, so I'm going to do it to you. Do you subscribe to the theory that the NFL, especially on defense, is moving to positionless players, meaning you just need to get talent on the field and then make it work? Do you subscribe to that theory? Because Mike Tomlin was asked about that, I believe it was the end of last season, and he said we can definitely see that it's trending in certain ways in that direction. Do you subscribe to that?
In a way, yes, but not entirely just yet. Like the people who I think want to just say it doesn't matter, just get them and make it work. You do need guys that know certain roles, especially with the ways that I think the better defenses play in the NFL. And I think the Steelers are much like that, is that you can get a great athlete, but you need to make sure that great athlete is good at what they're doing. Look at the Dolphins, what they tried to do with Minkah Fitzpatrick and how it didn't work. And they were trying to move him all over the place, and it never let him settle down into a position. The Steelers, they let him be the free ranging free safety that would help in coverage and make a lot of plays. And then once he got that down, then they said, okay, now flex out from there and then start to do things that you see and you study on tape. I think that there are limits, but I do think it is opening up where, heck, we just talked to DeMarvin Leal last week at OTAs, and he was talking about like, I mean, I even lined up at off-ball linebacker last year once or twice, and I had never done that even like in Pee Wee. So that's like I was a bit lost, but it was something that I learned that maybe I could do in a pinch here and there. I do think that there are circumstances where that is becoming the case, where the NFL is going to start recognizing that teams can do something like that. But I don't think it's going to be like the main thing. I still think there's going to be premier edge rushers, premier off-ball cover linebackers, premier outside corner, slot corner, safeties. There's going to be guys but there's going to be also a higher premium on the guys like Cam Sutton who can do multiple of those jobs. Yeah.
I think though, like when I think of if Chase Young were to be acquired by the Steelers, and let's say that the financials fit and everything, we're talking about from a scheme fit. Yeah, it's a little bit different. He's not your traditional outside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme. I view him a little bit more like, obviously 4-3 defensive end. That's kind of what he was doing at Ohio State, and that's what he's been primarily doing with Washington. I do think he is more versatile than some people are giving him credit for. I view him a little bit more like J.J. Watt in terms of the size, athleticism. I feel like, remember J.J. Watt? I mean, he could flex in a little bit, and then he also was working the edge. Still was able to pass rush. I think the Steelers would have to look at him from an overall piece of work and say, how could we mold this guy into what we want to do? We know he can do this, but could he do something else? And that would be a challenge. And that would be a challenge for everyone that deals with the pass rush. But boy, wouldn't that be a good problem to have if you have a pass rush that consists of those 4 players? I mean, poor Nick Herbig, but I'm sorry, Nick Herbig. If you get in Chase Young, I mean, come on now. Like, there's a big difference.
No, I do agree. There's a big difference there. We'll talk more about that difference and what other needs might be for the Pittsburgh Steelers and what they should value right now as far as free agents and other trades that are on the table. We'll talk about that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Jeff Hartman, don't go anywhere. But first, before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about FanDuel, the #1 sports book in America. The NBA Finals are on fire right now, but it's all coming down to this. It may be over Monday night as the Nuggets head into game 5 with a 3-1 lead back at home. Can the Heat keep it alive? Bet on that on those chances by going to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're going to be new to FanDuel, you got new customers get a chance to get a no sweat first bet. It gives you up to $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. Will Nikola Jokic win it all and win the Finals MVP? Looking like it. Or who win the series? Will the Heat make a comeback? Will Jimmy Butler get a chance to be up in there? All these things you can bet on when you go to FanDuel Sportsbook, an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500 when you join FanDuel today. Go to FanDuel.com/lockdown to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jeff Hartman of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Jeff, let's talk a little bit more about what we were just continue where we were at there, because we were talking about fitting different needs there and guys who could play different things. And Chase Young is a guy who, he's 6'4", 6'4 plus a little bit. He came into the league at 264. He has the right kind of size that maybe you could put him, use his strength. He hasn't, completely fit with the Commanders, and that's why they haven't signed him to a 5th-year extension. He does have injury concerns, but I wonder, with the position the Steelers are at right now, should the priority be somewhere else as far as trying to find a player like that's on a roster and may not be wanted? We've talked about this before in the show with the potential of Isaiah Simmons, linebacker from the Arizona Cardinals, also a top 10 pick from his draft, also didn't get his 5th-year extension. And that one also is on an organization that's kind of having a fire sale right now with the whole getting rid of DeAndre Hopkins and everything else that they've done. But looking at an Isaiah Simmons type, I hear you on the pass rush, but with the Steelers' current linebacker situation, especially cover linebacker situation, would you, if you were to be forced to pick between a Chase Young type, it doesn't have to be Chase Young himself, a Chase Young type versus Isaiah Simmons type of player in free agency or in a trade, which one would you prefer to fit with this roster?
Oh, I would definitely go inside linebacker. I mean, that type of player is, I think, it's more of a need, but this all comes back to the new regime in the front office, Omar Khan, Andy Weidel. And I have no clue what these guys are going to do. There used to be a time where anyone that covers a team, whether you're first-hand source, second-hand source, doesn't matter. With Kevin Colbert, they could just shut the books and say, okay, they're not making any moves till at least training camp, when people start moving around or maybe cuts are made and they trim their roster down, which isn't going to happen this year. But you know what I'm saying. This regime seems like, hey, we're open for business 24/7. Let's see what we can do. And I think that when you have these players, I wrote this article for the website, all the players that did not have their 5th-year option picked up, everyone said, well, yeah, they're still under contract. They are. But is there a bigger slap in the face to a player who is a first-round draft pick than a team saying, we have the option to have contractual control over you for 1 more year? It's going to cost us some money. That's going to fluctuate depending on the success you've had in the league. However, we're not even going to pick it up. We can essentially say, we're going to keep you for at least 1 more year. We're going to try to get an extension. We value you that much. If they say no, I mean, is there a bigger slap in the face than that? I don't think that there is, at least for a first-round draft pick. So when you bring up someone like Simmons, you bring up someone like Chase Young, those players have to feel already like they're slighted already. And so they might be saying, gosh, how fast can I get the hell out of here? And next thing you know, the agent starts talking. We saw this with Minka Fitzpatrick, which you brought up in the first segment in regards to, he was telling his agent, I want out of here. This is not working for me. And next thing you know, he ends up in Pittsburgh in 2019. So crazier things have happened, and a lot of the fan base is immediately like poo-pooing any idea of getting some of these players. I mean, look at the players that have just been flat out released. You brought up DeAndre Hopkins, Dalvin Cook's another one. I mean, these are high profile players in the National Football League that are just being cut. I feel like in the NFL, movement is happening more than it ever has been. Definitely seems to be trending more of the way of like NBA in terms of free agency and contract structure, all that stuff. But I would definitely love the Steelers to target more of an inside linebacker or someone that could even flex into that role if they need be. But playmakers is what they're wanting. That was what my source predominantly said repeatedly. They want playmakers. And so whatever position that comes, I think they'll be more than happy to have it. If it's a Chase Young as a pass rusher, if it's an inside linebacker flying sideline to sideline, making plays, both in coverage as well as in the run game, so be it. They just want playmakers. And this will also be very telling to me how the organization, top to bottom, views this roster. Do they view this as we're like one or two players away? We got to do what we got to do, or do they think this is more of a project that's maybe 2024 and on? That's going to be interesting to see.
I think it's very interesting to see. And again, like you said, I think it determines the fact that they've been aggressive as they have been, I think speaks a lot higher about this roster. I think a lot of people are just putting the Steelers away and saying, they got Kenny Pickett. They don't know. He's not going to be that good. And people are pushing this team to the side. They won 9 games last year with TJ Watt missing 2 months and then Kenny Pickett struggling through his first 5 or 6 starts. And then them getting red hot in the second half of the season. And that was with a much more difficult schedule, at least on paper, with opponents and based off of year over year, than they have last year. They don't got the Eagles this year. They don't got the Bills this year in their houses. Like that, this isn't the same sort of schedule. Now, teams change every year. There's always going to be one or two teams on your schedule that you're like, oh, that's a lot harder than it looked when we looked at the schedule back in June. But I still think that this is a team that you look at and the Steelers have reason to believe it's going to be competitive. Jeff, I think they've continued to look at it. They brought in Kwon Alexander the other month. I think that they should still be looking at this option as keeping it open. I think what they might even be doing right now is seeing how Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts and Mark Robinson finish through minicamp, and then they'll go and get their guy that they want to add to that position. Because I don't think that they're going to go in with just those guys going into the season. I think that they know how being thin at certain parts of the roster can crush you entirely. I mean, heck, they experienced that years ago with Ryan Shazier going down, and then they were having to pull Sean Spence out of free agency and hoping that he can pick things up next to Vince Williams, and then Arthur Moats was playing off-ball linebacker. They don't want to be back in those times, and I think that Kwon Alexander, or maybe even another guy, Deion Jones, who's still a free agent in the NFL, and he's even played in your division a little bit with the Browns. I think a move like that makes a lot of sense for what the Steelers want to be right now. Off-ball linebacker, you don't have your stud, your superstar that you're going to have that you think is going to carry that position the way we've seen Ryan Shazier, James Ferrier, guys like that over the years. But you can have very solid players who hold it down while your other star players, Minka Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, all start being the super playmakers.
It's interesting, you think about the Kwon Alexander, came in for a visit, left without a contract. We saw the same thing happen with Bud Dupree. And it was after Bud Dupree signed with Atlanta that he said that, I don't know if it was him or his agent, someone source said that the Pittsburgh Steelers wanted to sign him to a 2-year deal. He only wanted a 1-year deal. And I understand why. He wants 1 year, prove a deal so he can get his bag one more time before it's probably his final contract. But the Steelers wanted the 2 years, so Omar Khan could do his thing and manipulate the money and make sure they still have enough financial flexibility in 2023. Kwon Alexander might have been a similar situation. Maybe the Steelers were offering 1 and he wanted 2 or vice versa. I don't know. But the longer this thing goes on, you have to wonder, are the prices going up or down for these players? How long is Kwon Alexander wanting to sit around? Mini camps are wrapping up. You've got 6 weeks or so. How long is he going to be sitting around just saying, like, training camp's coming up, I'd really like to be with the team? And the Steelers have to want him there, because if you're going to bring in an inside linebacker, you want him to have that cohesion with that unit. You want him to have that comfortability with those players he's going to be out there with. We saw this with the players that you mentioned, whether you're talking about Who was the guy from the Avery Williamson from the Jets who was picked up midseason? It never worked out. They were never on the same page. It just seemed like it was trying to fit a square peg into a circular hole. It just didn't work out. So for me, I look at these free agents and say, I do think they're going to make a move. I don't think they're settled in any way, shape, or form. The question is does it fit financially? And is it a big enough name that the fan base would be content? That's a big question.
It's a big question there, but I think that there's possibilities there. I also know that not all players, like Justin Houston's one of these guys who they're okay. Some players are okay with not signing during mini camp because they just don't want to go through that. They just are like, listen, they'll come for the second half of training camp, get adjusted to some things. They're professional enough, and then they'll go in there. I'm not so sure Kwon Alexander applies to that, but I know other players do. But I want to talk more with you, Jeff, about where the depth of this team can help them get over certain humps that have crushed them in past years. We'll talk about that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Jeff Hartman. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jeff Hartman of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Jeff, let's keep going here, because I think that's something that we keep talking about is depth. There's a lot more depth on this team compared to how it was for the past, I'd say, even several years with the way that they were constructed. And it was a natural part of when you had a high-paid quarterback and for many years the highest-paid wide receiver and also a running back that you were paying a lot of money on top of guys like Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, eventually Cam Hayward. They were paying a lot of top-tier guys to try and get together a team that could go in and do some damage throughout the. And they got to an AFC Conference Championship game in 2016. But with that, over the years of how many times you invest in that, you can't reinvest. If you don't hit in all your draft picks, you can't reinvest and then fill out the depth chart with solid players throughout the second and third spots at several different key positions. And that can lead to, if a couple injuries happen, you might just be in the rough spot. The Steelers experienced that last year without TJ Watt when they had to rely on their backups in those situations. Alex Highsmith was kind of holding the fort down. But I think that when you're looking at this roster now, you can also think back to, when they were short on cornerbacks. There were years they were short on wide receivers. It's been a thing at different points in time. Fitzgerald Toussaint fumbling against the Broncos in the playoffs when they were down to a fifth running back. And granted, that was more extreme because they did have depth at running back that year. But my point being, I think there are so many positions on this roster right now that are ready for one or two injuries to handle. Even the quarterback position, by keeping Mitch Trubisky and Mason Rudolph, you have two guys that know the offense. It won't be their first rodeo. They're veterans. You know that they understand the plan. You don't have to conform them to your identity. They've been here. They know it. I think when you look at that, what they've done on the offensive line, the defensive line even now, Markus Golden gives you a little bit of something like that in the edge rusher position, even cornerback with some of the young and old guys they've added. Is this a team that you think can absorb a bunch of different hits in ways that past Steelers teams couldn't?
Well, in past teams, I would say that the number of positions that have quality depth that I'm comfortable with would definitely be in the minority in terms of those that I'm not comfortable with. And I think that's reversed this year. Do I think they have depth at every single position that has me thinking that they're good? No. We've already talked about inside linebacker. I'm not content with the players that what if a Cole Holcomb re-injures his foot and next thing you know, what do you have? Mark Robinson and Landon Roberts. I mean, what are you going to do? Bring Tanner Muse down into the box? Is that what you want to do? I don't think so. So I'm not happy with that. And another one that I definitely do question is safety. Minkah Fitzpatrick is all world.
Yeah.
You have DeMonte KZ as the center fielder, but Keanu Neal is not Terrell Edmonds, and especially in coverage. Now, Keanu Neal in the box, he's fine. Let him thump. That's what he does. He runs and hits, and that's his MO. But he doesn't cover well. And so if Minkah Fitzpatrick's gone, and we know how much he does in that deep secondary and in the intermediate, and when he's in that robber role, I mean, is there anyone that does it better? I can't think of one that does it better. So if you lose any one of those guys, it does make me question, what do they do? Is it Trey Norwood? Is it Miles Killebrew? Is it Elijah Riley, who I've been hearing really good things about him heading into minicamp? I don't know, but I'm not so sold on that depth either way around it. Cornerback, fans that are comfortable with cornerback are really relying on those rookies to be able to contribute right away. And Corey Trice is getting all the headlines, But my gosh, it's how many times do we see this year after year? It's going to take time.
Yeah.
He was a 7th round pick for a reason. I'm
Mhm.
leaning more on Joey Porter Jr. coming in and being an outside cornerback in some sub packages and things like that. To me, it's on the defensive side where I see the vast majority of depth concerns. Offensively, I'm pretty comfortable. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm pretty comfortable. Wide receiver is the one position on the offensive side of the ball that I kind of sit there and if you lose George Pickens or if you lose a Deontay Johnson, I don't know what they're going to do in terms of, is it Calvin Austin III? How's he going to perform? Was it Hakeem Butler? Is it Miles Boykin? I don't think it's Gunnar Olszewski, but you never know. Anthony Miller, the guy's always hurt, and he's already nursing a hamstring injury this offseason. So that's the only position offensively. If you don't want to include specific offensive line like center is another one that concerns me.
I agree. Center. If Mason Cole goes down, there's a big question about Kendrick Green and can he fit in there?
I still think they would flex someone to center before they would put Kendrick Green in there. I think that someone like James Daniels, who has significant experience,
he's played there
potentially. Yeah, he has. I think they would do that and then use their depth at guard to better conform that line. But I don't know. But those are me. I mean, I'm still pretty happy with the depth on this team. I just rattled off a bunch of positions that may sound counterintuitive, but I'm still pretty happy with the depth on this team.
I think that's the big thing here is that I feel like they're in a position where as long as their stars are intact, there are positions where you could take 1 or 2 injuries and still keep fighting as long as those guys hold down the fort. Because you're not asking, like, for example, people talk about, the Steelers secondary, being, struggling so much in 2016 and 2017 during those years, even 2018 as well. But during those years, the Steelers secondary just didn't have the answers. Their starters were kind of even not at the level of what I think that they would expect their guys to be now if they lost a guy. But like, you think about guys like Antoine Blake, Artie Burns, the guys that were filling in there, and they were okay at times, but they were subpar when you stack them up against a lot of other league starters. Whereas this year, you're in a situation like you're talking about with Joey Porter Jr. You want him to start, but guess what? Patrick Peterson just had 5 interceptions last year. Levi Wallace with your team had 4 interceptions last year. You're not pressured to say, hey, Joey, you have to start outside because we got nobody else right now. I think that that's where the Steelers are right now. It's that they're in a position where they could use they want Broderick Jones to beat Dan Moore Jr. They want Joey Porter Jr. to be that outside corner, but they're not in a position where if they're not, this team is done for. Because I think that's been where they've been at when they've drafted a guy. They needed Devin Bush right away to fit in at inside linebacker, and he did for a year. And then a year and a half even, and then he got hurt, and then he was never what he was looking like in his first year and a half.
Well, let me ask you this quick question, Chris. Not to interrupt you, but last season the Steelers went 1-6 without TJ Watt. In 2023, with the depth they have currently, if they make no more additions, like they don't change anything, this is what they have going into the regular season. If they lose Watt for 7 games, do they win more than 1?
Yes.
I would agree. So that tells me the depth is better. That would tell me the depth across the board, offensively, being able to carry the team, scoring more points, defensively with the addition of Golden and hopefully Herbig producing something of a pass rush. I think they are in a better position. So that tells me that their depth is better, because when you lose someone like Watt last year, it's like losing your entire defense at times. So I think that answers the question that we're talking about, is that if they were to lose TJ Watt, who, I hate to say it, he's like the one-man team for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
He's like Troy Polamalu was back in the late 2000s. They were the number 1 defense for like 4 to 5 years, but that 1 out of 5 years was the 1 year Troy played. Missed like basically the whole season, and it's TJ Watt right now.
Exactly. So I think their depth is improved. That should make the fan base very happy, and they should be a little bit more confident than they were last year heading into the regular season.
I agree. I think it should be. And when I look back over that schedule and talk about some of the games that they could have won here with a healthy TJ Watt, the New England Patriots, they lost by 3 in that game. Maybe the Cleveland Browns 70-29. That was a bigger difference. Yeah. I'm not so sure that would have worked out their way. But the Jets game, there was a play where Zach Wilson escaped from a sack. Maybe TJ Watt brings him down, and that crushes that game. The Dolphins game, another one that was like that, even though the offense kind of lost that with the turnovers, and then maybe even the Bengals game, because he was back for that game, but we all saw he was not 100% and he wasn't getting after people. And that was a game they lost by 7. And I look at that and I think, man, like, if TJ Watt's healthy, you can't tell me that at least one or maybe even two of those games don't flip in the direction of the Steelers and with a straight face tell me that. So, and if they do that, they got at least 10 wins, maybe even 11 in that spot. And that puts you in a much different situation. But then you also get into the contingencies of like, if let's say in that situation, they beat the Patriots and the Jets, they start 3-1 instead of 1-3. Does Kenny Pickett see the field?
Good point.
And do we know where they are? And I think that's where it's like, yeah, sure, that would have been awesome. But would we know what we know today about Kenny Pickett? And would he have gone through the wars and the trials that he did last year? I think all things happen for their own reasons, and that's where I'm kind of like, I hear you, but there's I think there's still things that you can pull out of that struggling start that they went through last year.
It's a butterfly effect. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
I get it too, Jeff. Thanks so much for being here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. As always, we love having you here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
So you can check me out on Twitter. It's at jhartman, HARTMAN_PIT. You can check me out on the Steel Curtain Network podcast platform. So you can go to anywhere where you get your podcast, search Steel Curtain Network or just Steelers, and you'll find us. And we do a ton of content. You can check me out on Let's Ride, my individual show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning for your drive time to work. Make sure you check that out. Otherwise, you can check me out at BehindTheSteelCurtain.com.
Absolutely, check him out there. It's a great website. That's where I got my start. Thanks so much, Jeff, for always being a good friend. We look forward to having you back here on the show very soon. I'm Chris Carter, your host on the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, where I cover Pitt athletics and do the North Shore Drive podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on all things Pittsburgh sports. You can also find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast Monday through Friday every day, breaking things down on your Pittsburgh Steelers on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this channel for all of our daily episodes. We'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, as the Steelers begin mini camp and what all things we're looking for there as their final week of practice before they take their final break before training camp. All that and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be back tomorrow.